Greetings and welcome back. My name is Jack Nakashima. In today's lesson, we are continuing to focus on the great prostitute who sits on many waters, the woman sitting on the scarlet beast, the mother of idolatry and abominations. All descriptions for Babylon the Great. But now, we're going to read about her destruction. This great city will be the center of world trade and the global seat of government. Therefore, all nations will be severely affected by her downfall. Let's look at verse 1. After these things I saw another angel coming down out of heaven, having great authority, and the earth was lit up by his glory. We are introduced to another angel. We're not told this angel's name, but he is an unusual angel with great authority. Light emits from him, which is similar to the brilliance that Moses' face shone after being in the presence of God, as we see in Exodus 34:29. It came about when Moses was coming down from Mount Sinai, and the 2 tablets of the testimony were in Moses' hand as he was coming down from the mountain, that Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because of his speaking with him. It also reminds us of the Christmas star, which was either God's visible manifestation of himself, what we call his Shekinah glory, or the Christmas star was an angel whose brilliance made him visible in the night sky. It is this special angel who will announce the final destruction of Babylon, verses 2 and 3. And he cried with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, and it has become a dwelling for demons, and a prison for every unclean spirit, and a prison for every unclean and hateful bird. For of the wine of the fury of her fornication all the nations have drunk. And the kings of the earth committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth became rich by the power of her excess. You may recall that we had a similar proclamation in chapter 14. And another angel, a second, followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, who made all the nations drink the wine of the fury of her fornication. Babylon falls, and no human will live there again. Instead, it becomes a prison for the demons. In our last lesson, I mentioned that you may want to take some time and read Isaiah chapters 13 and 14 and Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51. If you did, you hopefully noticed Isaiah 13:21. But desert creatures will lie down there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches also will live there, and shaggy goats will frolic there. What I want to point out is that owls and ostriches, as well as other creatures, are used to describe demons. And that's the same as we see here in verse 2 with the phrase, every unclean and hateful bird. You will see this in other places as well, such as in Jeremiah 50:39. And the reason for Babylon's destruction is clear. She led the world against God. The people loved her for her riches and ability to make them rich. She enticed them away from eternal riches with the promise of earthly, temporal wealth. Continuing at verse 4, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out, my people, out of her, so that you have no fellowship in her sins, and so that you do not take hold of her plagues, for her sins have piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her evil works. Although these verses follow 2 and 3, they are warning people to leave prior to the destruction. My people is probably a reference to unbelieving Jewish people because believers would have been persecuted by Babylon. God is calling on them to remove themselves before he pours out his wrath on the city. This is reminiscent of the angels who pulled Lot and his daughters out of Sodom before God destroyed it. God is long-suffering and always wants to provide time for repentance and to change our ways. Again, if you read the chapters in Isaiah and Jeremiah, then this should sound familiar, as Jeremiah 50, verse 8 reads, Flee from the midst of Babylon, and go out from the land of the Chaldeans, and be like a lead goat in front of the flock. In Jeremiah, he said to be like a lead goat. Don't wait on others. Blaze the trail yourself, and make sure to escape the coming punishment. When it says God has remembered her evil works, that does not mean that he had forgotten, for God cannot forget in the sense of losing his memory temporarily. What it means is that he is bringing it to mind. he is recalling what she has done. It indicates that he is about to act, and that's why he is bringing it back up. So what shall be Babylon's punishment? The description starts in verse 6. Render to her even as she has rendered, and give her double. Double based on her works. In the cup which she has mix double for her. Babylon is punished doubly for what she has done. Not only did she defy God, but she led others against him. Therefore, she rightly deserves God's full punishment. Again, we look to Jeremiah to see that all this had been prophesied long before John. Shout against her on every side. She has surrendered. Her towers fall. Her walls are thrown down. For this is Yahweh's vengeance. Take vengeance on her as she has done. Do to her. Jeremiah 50:15, and summon the archers against Babylon, all who draw the bow, encamp against her on every side. Let no one escape. Repay her according to her deeds, according to all that she has done. Do to her, for she has defied Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel. Jeremiah 50, verse 29. And then we read of her attitude, the pomp and arrogance of Babylon the Great in verse 7. As she glorified herself and lived in excess, give her just as much in torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and I will never see sorrow. Like the ancient city of Babel, when they built the tower to the heavens, the pride and self-glorying will be over the top. They lift themselves up to God and boast that they cannot be hurt, but God will humble the proud. In fact, he will completely humiliate them. If we look back to Isaiah, we will see similar wording and the result of such boasting. And you said, I will be queen forever. So you did not take these things to heart, nor did you recall how these things end. Now then, hear this, you sensual one who sits securely. You say in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. I will not sit as a widow, nor will I know the loss of children. But both of these things will come on you in a moment, on a single day, the loss of children and widowhood. In their full measure they will come upon you, despite the abundance of your witchcraft, despite the power of your enchantments. Isaiah 47, verses 7 through 9. So the very things that Babylon boasts about, that she will reign forever and not suffer loss, both of these things will happen to her. And note what Isaiah said, in a moment, on a single day. Revelation 18:8 concurs with the suddenness of her decline. On account of this, in one day her plagues will come, death and sorrow and famine, and she shall be burned up with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judges her. And now we get some specifics. Death, sorrow, famine, and fire. Jeremiah also prophesied the fire. Behold, I am against you, O proud one, declares the Lord Yahweh of armies. For your day has come, the time when I punished you, and the proud one will stumble and fall, and no one will help him up. And I will start a fire in his cities, and it will devour all the surrounding areas. Jeremiah 50, verses 31 and 32. Babylon will be overcome by God's wrath. Many will die, and those who are left will bereave a loved one and face famine and the destruction of the city with fire. And according to Jeremiah, the fire will spread beyond Babylon to the surrounding areas. It will be overwhelming destruction and grief. And it is not just the people of Babylon who will suffer and mourn. Verses 9 and 10, and the kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived in excess with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing far off in fear of her torments, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. We saw in the last chapter, verse 16, that the 10 regional kings will play in part in Babylon's destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw, and the beast, these will hate the prostitute, and will make her desolate and naked, and eat her flesh and consume her with fire. So now, when we read about the kings of the earth, we are reading about the local leaders throughout the world. It would not include the global horn kings. However, all these other leaders, or kings as they are called, will weep and mourn over the loss of Babylon. They will be stunned by its quick fall. Again, Jeremiah told us how the world would react. At the announcement of the taking of Babylon, the earth will tremble, and an outcry will be heard among the nations. Jeremiah 50:46. I hope all these references back to the Hebrew prophets is not tedious to you. One thing that I hope you pick up is that so much of the book of Revelation was already revealed prior to John's day. And indeed, a major key for us in order to understand John's writing is to study the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and to see how the prophets understood the future. In fact, many doctrinal errors and denominational splits have occurred because people did not properly study and understand the Old Testament. Anyhow, we now turn to the businessmen. The world's economy will crumble before their eyes. Their reaction is initially mentioned in verse 11. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargo anymore. Their immediate thoughts go to their loss of income. There's no mention of the loss of life. Their focus is on their own loss, how they are financially ruined. Verses 12 and 13 show us that it is all sorts of goods and merchandise that are involved, especially the finer things this world has to offer. Cargo including gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, and all scented wood, and every vessel of ivory, and every vessel of precious wood, and of bronze and iron, and marble, and cinnamon and spice, and incense and ointment, and frankincense and wine and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and cattle, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. Yes, bodies and souls of men too, an obvious indication of the corruption of Babylon and her merchants. Continuing with verse 14, and the fruit that your soul craved has departed from you, and all the sumptuous and splendid things are lost to you, and no, they will not find them anymore. Now they think about their personal appetites, the things they love. Along with their business and their wealth, gone are the delectable that they delighted in. Their reaction continues in verses 15 through 17a. The merchants of these things, who were made rich by her, will stand far off for the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city arrayed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked out with gold and precious stones and pearl. For in 1 hour such great wealth was stripped. They are greatly dismayed, but they will not run to her aid. They do not want to be swept up in the destruction. They mourn over Babylon's luxuries and wealth because that was the root and cause of all their luxury and wealth. But it will not be just the merchants who lose their wealth. Global commerce requires the shipping of goods, so we next see the reaction of the shipping industry. The second half of verse 17 and through 19. And every shipmaster and everyone that sails anywhere, and mariners, and as many as work at sea stood far off, and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads, and cried out with weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city by whom all who had ships in the sea became rich because of her wealth. For in a single hour she has been brought to ruin. Again, the world's wealth will be tied to Babylon. When she suffers, everyone suffers. When Babylon is ruined, everyone is ruined. And again, they are in shock because her destruction comes in a single hour. Like the others, they weep and mourn. They throw dust on their heads as a sign of their mourning, their ruin, and their distress. It is not clear who speaks the words of verse 20. The New Testament Greek did not make use of opening and closing quotation marks like modern English, nor did the older English versions like the King James or the American Standard of 1901. So verse 20 could be a continuation of the speech of the shipmasters, or it could be from a different source. Some versions like the RSV and the ESV clearly indicate that the translators saw it as a continuation of the shipmaster's speech. Others, like the New King James or the New American Standard, do not make it clear who they think is speaking. It reads, Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints, and you apostles, and you prophets, for God has judged your judgment against her. So it could be the shipmasters who, in their pain and anguish, call out these words, but I would suggest that the more natural reading is to see this more like a narrator in a play, injecting this call to celebrate. Either way, we know that heaven and the saints will indeed rejoice. Jeremiah 51:48 tells us, "Then the heavens and the earth and all that is in them will sing for joy over Babylon, for from the north the destroyers will come against her, declares Yahweh." Now we turn to the last paragraph of Revelation 18, starting with verse 21. "And a strong angel picked up a stone, like a great millstone, and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with a mighty fall shall Babylon the great city be thrown down, and no longer found at all." The strong angel gives a picture of Babylon's fall. He throws a great millstone into the sea. Millstones are very heavy and will immediately sink to the bottom. This image demonstrates that there will be no future for Babylon. Again, Babylon has fallen before, but it has also been revived. The takeover of Babylon by the Medo-Persians involved very little conflict. And from Alexander the Great to Saddam Hussein, history shows us many who have used and rebuilt the city. Now, once again, we turn to Jeremiah to see a parallel prophecy. "And when you finish reading the scroll, you will tie a stone to it and throw it into the middle of the Euphrates, and you will say, So will Babylon sink and not rise because of the disaster that I will bring upon her, and they will grow weary." The picture in Jeremiah is not quite as dramatic, but it makes the same point. Babylon will sink like a stone, never to rise again. Now the last 3 verses of chapter 8 continue the strong angel's message. "And the sound of harpists and musicians and flute players and trumpeters will no longer be heard in you, and all craftsmen of all crafts will no longer be found in you, and the sound of a mill will no longer be heard in you, and the light of a lamp will no longer shine in you, and the sound of the bridegroom and of the bride will no longer be heard in you, because your merchants were the great men of the earth, because by your witchcraft all the nations were deceived, and in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints, and of all who have been slain on the earth." These last 3 verses emphasize the desolation of Babylon's future. No more joy and music, no more building and design, no more weddings and celebrations. They will reap doom because of their sin, because they opposed God and deceived the world into idolatry. And Babylon was guilty of killing those who lived for God. So not only did they not follow the true and living God, but they sought to persecute those who did. Thus their end will be a judgment of ruin and perpetual destruction. Now, interestingly, the book of Revelation quickly switches to the second coming in chapter 19. It does not detail much of what happens between the destruction of Babylon and Yeshua's return. The key events that are involved include the middle part of the Battle of Armageddon, that which happens between the gathering of the armies in the Jezreel Valley and the Lord's return and defeat of those armies. The other key event is the turning of the Jewish people in faith towards Jesus. And it is that national repentance and cry to Jesus that instigates his return. But since our focus is the book of Revelation, I will not be detailing those events. I do encourage you, however, to study them. I think the simplest way is for you to study Zechariah, chapters 12, 13, and 14. Again, Zechariah 12, 13, and 14. And I would suggest you study those before moving into our next lesson, which is Revelation chapter 19. God bless.